Here we are, the end of another week. Seems like just time flies by. The days drag and weeks fly. I think I've read someplace, and it is amazing that it's already August, closing in on the end of the year. Pretty soon we'll be talking about Thanksgiving and Christmas. Just a reminder, I think, brothers and sisters, that our life is fleeting. It goes fast. Only things that are done for Christ will last. So I pray that you feel that sense of urgency and that desire to serve the Lord with the time that you have left. Today, this is the 100th episode in Romans through Revelation. So a good milestone here. I am pretty pleased just with the perseverance myself, actually, and for your perseverance to go through and listen to these as well and to be guided through the Word. So 100 today, hooray! We should celebrate that. This section continues the chapter the section we started in verse 11 of chapter 2 yesterday, which is a section about submission. And this continues the theme of submission in the face of suffering and brings it into the home. We were talking about submission to the government and submission, slaves to their servants or servants to their masters. But here we bring it into the home. We talk about husbands and wives. This is really not the cosmic Christ, but the Christ of the kitchen, Christ in our home. There's always another party in our home. There may be a husband and wife, but Christ is there with them. If you are a widow or widower, you are not alone. Christ is with you. And these verses are a great reminder that Christ is present and is aware of our relationships and has guidance and direction and desire. So as we look at chapter 3, we see verses 1 through 6 as an address to the wives. As you go through it, notice that the submission of a godly wife is an adornment to the gospel. This is the way in for her husband. We often talk about election and how do you know if someone is elect or not? My answer usually is you don't know. So share the gospel with them and see what happens. In a marriage and a family, I am convinced that the Lord is wise and knows what he's doing. And if you are a woman and you are married to a unbelieving husband or a husband who's weak in the faith, God has put you in that marriage to save or strengthen your husband. Be convinced of that. Be sure of that, because the Lord here is giving you guidance and direction on how to appeal to your husband in terms of the gospel. It is the true attraction of an elect man to his wife to see his wife acting in submission. I've counseled guys, I've talked to friends and who were believers or weak believers, and oftentimes it's a wife who insists, or a wife who is always bringing up the gospel, a wife who's always haranguing her husband about belief or going to church or going to a Bible study. That becomes a stumbling block. Seems like the Lord is telling us here that a much more effective way is to be submissive to your husband in the Lord. So, this has always been the true way to attract an elect man to the gospel, and it has always been, as Sarah knew from Abraham. So verses 1 through 6 are about the submission of a godly wife, true attraction for her husband. Then the discussion turns to husbands in verse 7. If wives are to be submissive, Christian husbands then are to be tender and considerate of her needs. I like that word cherish. My wife's name is Sherry. She spells it Cheri. It's derived from that word cherish. And it always reminds me that I'm to be cherishing my wife, that is loving her and caring for her as I care for myself. That's what husbands are called to do. This is our duty and our privilege, and especially when we're facing challenges to our faith, challenges from the culture and from the government to our Christian faith. It's so important to nurture your wives during this time, encourage them, build them up, protect them from the world around them that would lead them astray, just as Satan led astray Eve in the garden. Don't be like Adam, who apparently just stood there and watched the whole thing unfold. But husbands, you need to be active in caring for your wives in these difficult days. Verses 13 through 17, then, he turns to everybody. Let me turn there in my Bible. 13 to 17, he says, "For now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good?" That he's giving a general rule here for everybody. The general rule is that those who do good don't suffer for it. It's a kind of a truism or an axiom, but there are exceptions. And in the very next verse, realizing that there's exceptions, and there will be exceptions, he talks about how to respond to those exceptions. What happens if you do suffer for doing good? Verse 14, he says, but, few things here. I'll just go down a list, and as you read today, you can come and look at those things. First is expect blessing. Expect blessing. Second, don't fear. Fear God, not men. Be ready. He wants us to have words in our mouth to give a hope for the gospel, to explain the hope that it lies in us, to tell us why, tell others why we are willing to stand firm in the face of suffering, even to submit to unjust suffering, to be ready to respond to that. And keep a clear conscience, he closes this section with. By that he means always do what's right in any situation. Always do what the Lord would have you to do. You know, I understand that sometimes the issues of the moment offer you a way out by compromising, by not doing the right thing, or not doing the right thing fully, that you can avoid suffering, that you can avoid accusation, that you can avoid being laughed at by just going along. I've done it, you've done it, we've all felt guilty about it afterward. What Peter's saying here is always do the right thing. You might not like the consequence, I understand that. You might not like the result of doing the right thing. I understand that as well. I've been there with you. But the command here is to keep a clear conscience. So brothers and sisters, especially in situations where you are facing suffering, do what's right. Don't turn away, but always do what's right. A couple of problematic verses. He throws them right here at the end of the chapter. And I'll point out to you, he talks about, for Christ also suffered once for sins. I'm in verse 18. The righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. So let's just stop there for a second. What's he talking about? Proclaimed to the spirits in prison. Well, I think what he's talking about is Christ, after his death, went to spirits who were in the place of the dead. Hell is empty right now, incidentally. He went to where the spirits are bound, the place of the dead, and proclaimed his victory at the cross to them. Colossians talks about this. I think it's, let me turn back to Colossians quickly here. I think it's chapter 2. Teaching through the book of Colossians, so I should have this on the top of my head here, but he talks about this in chapter 2, verse 15. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them. So what has happened here is Christ proclaimed his victory to these bound spirits in the place of the dead. Some spirits are loose and some are bound. But these bound spirits, Christ proclaimed his victory over them. Then he goes on here and he says, he went proclaimed to spirits in prison because they formerly did not obey. When God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Verse 21, baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. What? Baptism, which now saves you. Notice what he's saying here. He is making an analogy, or what I'd say is a type and an antitype relationship between Noah and the ark and baptism. Noah in the ark was brought safely through the judgment of the world in the same way that is through this being in Christ, we are going to be brought through judgment because we are in Christ. So the analogy there is he's not saying that the act or the ritual or the dunking in water is a salvation act. Some think that that's what this says. It's not true. What he is saying is that just as Noah was delivered, so the believer is delivered as well. He is drawing an analogy between how Noah is protected and how we're protected. So I hope that clears it up. Another series I have in mind to do is on difficult verses in the Bible. They're not difficult in my view, but some stumble over them and come up with some weird theologies based on them, and we'd look at some of those. So let me know what you think about that idea. Also thinking about instead of doing a read through the Bible as we've done through the whole year or through a major part of the New Testament, thinking about doing a regular Bible study through the book of Revelation. So tell me what you think, what you'd like to do in the future. A couple applications here. Submitting and deferring to others is a really unmistakable supernatural public evidence of faith and should be embraced. It's really a supernatural evidence of that. Also, sometimes our submission is expressed in restraint. It's expressed in maybe not saying something that would disrupt fellowship or unity or love in a body. You know, we all love to be right. We all love to have the right opinion, the right knowledge, the right information, and when we're sure we're right, we want to tell other people. That can sometimes be off-putting, especially in areas that are not important. So I think sometimes we need discernment there to submit our own desire to be right, to demonstrate our own intelligence or demonstrate our own ability to discern things, to submit that to others, and before we open our mouth, think about whether or not what we are about to say is going to produce unity in the body, love, care for one another. You could say the right thing in the wrong way, and it has a bad effect on people. So again, sometimes submission is expressed as restraint that's exercised to keep unity and love. Look at verses 8 through 12 one more time and think about that. So God bless you, brothers and sisters. Hope you have a great weekend. There's a great weekend coming up here. Spend some time reflecting on what you've read this week. We've gone through James and into 1 Peter. We've talked about faith that works and now faith that weathers storms. And what is the Lord? How is the Lord using this in your life? Is He preparing you for something that's coming? Is He giving you a moment to reflect on something that you've gone through? Or perhaps you're in the storm right now. God bless you, brothers and sisters. Have a great weekend. We'll pick it up again on Monday.